another topic. Minister, I'm not sure if you recall, but on the 5th of March in the Senate, you were asked questions about the Australian submariners aboard the USS Charlotte and the sinking of the Iranian vessel.
Can you just give us one moment?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. So it was on the 5th of March you asked in the Senate about the sinking of the Iranian vessel in the Indian Ocean by the USS Charlotte and whether Australian submariners were on board, and you said, and I quote, "For operational and security reasons, we do not disclose specific information regarding Australian personnel." Is that still the government's policy?
I do remember that, and I also recall, and I think you might have asked me subsequently as well, or maybe one of your colleagues, that is the usual practice for operational reasons. On this occasion, I think we made clear that the PM determined following an NSC meeting that it was in the public interest to disclose the presence of Australian personnel, and that was done.
The very next day. It's a very quick turnaround from you telling the Senate that you could not disclose that information to the Prime Minister disclosing it in a Sky News interview. No disrespect to Sky News, fair question to ask, but if you can't tell the Senate, why can you tell Sky News about operationally sensitive information?
I think I just answered that.
It didn't explain it to me.
I just answered that.
The government changed its view, I guess.
I just answered that. I refer you to my previous answer.
But why did the government change the view? Why in 24 hours?
I refer you to the previous answer. I just answered that question.
I don't think it addressed the question at all. And I'm seeking
that is my answer.
Well, I'm seeking further explanation from you.
Well, good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Very kind.
I think I've been quite transparent. I said what I said. PM, a decision was made. We outlined why, and the PM, and I think subsequently others disclosed that. I think I might have answered that in the Senate as well.
Well, I mean, why should we take, in the future, if I ask you a question, you tell me it's operationally sensitive, should I just wait to see if the PM pops up on Sky tomorrow and discloses it? Or, like, how do we know what's genuinely operationally sensitive and actually can't be disclosed, and what will be disclosed at the convenience of the government?
There are so many things I could say about the way in which classified information was used under the government you were a part of, although I acknowledge you weren't a minister for political purposes, but I'm going to refrain from doing so, Senator
It's very
Paterson.
restrained.
I know, out of courtesy for you and the fact I think you've got to go at lunchtime. It is, I think this was a decision made after consideration, which is why the PM made clear the sequence of the decision making, including consideration by NSC, and as you know, that ensures the sort of weighing of considerations that you're referencing, and in these circumstances, that the decision was made to be transparent with the Australian people about that fact.
But I mean, we have often had exchanges in this and other forums about how you don't disclose NSC meetings either, but again in this interview the Prime Minister disclosed an NSC meeting. So what's the criteria for disclosing an NSC meeting?
Well, it's probably a question to PM&C, but let me see if I can assist.
Thank you.
I think in these circumstances the statement does speak for itself. That the judgment that the government came to, and you know, this is a particular, obviously a very high, there's a lot of public scrutiny, that it was important for that fact to be disclosed to the Australian people. We took that decision with careful consideration and weighing the public interest and transparency objectives with some of the objectives that you have referenced.
Sure. So are you not concerned, though, that a precedent has been set? Because I'm sure there'll be other incidents like this in the future, and I'm sure you again will be asked.
And I would say good luck, not to you, to them, because I mean I will give the answer I think is the appropriate answer.
But just to clarify, just to finish my question, you'll get asked from across the chamber, could be us, could be the Greens, could be anyone, about an incident like this in the future if one happens. How will you be able to rely again on operational security given the Prime Minister set this new precedent?
Senator,
I haven't finished my question.
It's not a game, though.
Mr. You strongly object when people interrupt you.
Sorry.
How will we be able to know whether or not we can rely on your assurances that it's genuinely operationally sensitive and it cannot be answered? Or how will we know that the Prime Minister may decide later on just to disclose it?
You finished?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I have.
First, I take my obligations and the government takes our obligations to the Parliament very seriously. I do believe that ministerial accountability through to the Australian people through the Parliament is a critical aspect of the Westminster system. And I think you would, I hope, have observed that in how I operate in the chamber. You will recall that I gave an additional answer to the Senate on this issue to update the Senate consistent with the Prime Minister's answer for that reason, even though that, frankly, was probably an abundance of caution, but I thought it was the appropriate thing to do given the interest.
Something remarkable unfolded in Canberra this week, and it wasn't another routine committee hearing destined to disappear into the political archives. What started as a seemingly straightforward line of questioning quickly turned into one of the most intense national security confrontations Parliament has seen in recent months. At the centre of it all stood Senator James Paterson and Foreign Minister Penny Wong, locked in a tense exchange over transparency, national security, and a decision made by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese that continues to generate fierce political debate. The issue traces back to a highly sensitive national security matter involving Australian personnel serving aboard a United States submarine. Just weeks earlier, government ministers had repeatedly stated that operational and security considerations prevented them from disclosing specific information about Australian personnel involved in the mission. That position appeared clear, it appeared firm, and according to ministers, it reflected long-standing national security practice. Then everything changed. Just hours after government representatives had indicated that such information could not be publicly disclosed, the Prime Minister himself publicly confirmed details that many observers believed had previously been treated as operationally sensitive. Suddenly, questions began emerging across the political spectrum. Had the government's position changed? If so, why? What criteria were used to make that decision? And perhaps most importantly, what precedent might that create for future national security matters? Those questions formed the foundation of Senator Paterson's relentless line of attack this week. From the moment the exchange began, it was clear Paterson wasn't interested in broad political talking points. He wasn't looking for prepared media lines. He wanted something far more specific. He wanted to understand how information deemed too sensitive for Parliament one day could become suitable for public disclosure the next. That simple contradiction became the centrepiece of the entire confrontation. Minister Wong acknowledged the government's previous position. She reiterated that operational security considerations remain important and that governments routinely withhold sensitive information to protect personnel and national interests. However, she argued that the Prime Minister's disclosure followed careful consideration, including discussions through the National Security Committee, and was ultimately judged to be in the public interest. On paper, that explanation appeared straightforward. Inside the hearing room, however, Paterson wasn't convinced. Again and again, he returned to the same central concern. If information is genuinely operationally sensitive, how can Australians know when that classification applies and when it doesn't? If exceptions can be made, what are the rules? And who decides when those rules change? What followed was one of the most persistent exchanges of the entire hearing. Paterson repeatedly pressed for clarity. Wong repeatedly defended the government's decision-making process. Neither side showed any sign of backing down. The tension wasn't merely procedural, it reflected a much larger debate that has been growing across Australian politics in recent years. Questions surrounding transparency, accountability, executive power, and national security are becoming increasingly important as global tensions continue to rise. Australians are paying closer attention to how governments handle sensitive information, particularly at a time when geopolitical instability dominates international headlines. This week alone, discussions around defence cooperation, regional security partnerships, intelligence sharing, and military readiness have remained prominent topics across Australia's political landscape. Against that backdrop, any disagreement over national security protocols instantly attracts attention. And attention is exactly what this exchange received. Within hours, clips from the hearing began circulating online. Political commentators weighed in. Former officials offered competing interpretations. Supporters of the government argued that flexibility is sometimes necessary when balancing transparency with operational concerns. Critics argued that consistency is essential if public confidence in government statements is to be maintained. Social media quickly became a battleground. Some viewers praised Paterson's persistence, arguing he was asking questions many Australians wanted answered. Others defended Wong's position, noting that governments frequently face complex decisions involving competing priorities and evolving circumstances. What made the clash particularly compelling was its simplicity. The issue wasn't centred on a complicated piece of legislation. It wasn't focused on obscure budget figures. It revolved around a question that ordinary Australians could immediately understand. If something is too sensitive to discuss publicly today, under what circumstances does it become appropriate to discuss tomorrow? That question resonated far beyond Canberra. Across Australia, citizens routinely place trust in institutions to handle sensitive matters responsibly. Veterans trust that operational information will be protected. Defence personnel trust that security protocols exist for a reason. Citizens trust that governments balance transparency with national security obligations carefully. When apparent inconsistencies emerge, questions naturally follow. Paterson understood that dynamic and repeatedly returned to it throughout the hearing. His argument wasn't necessarily that information should never be disclosed. Rather, he appeared focused on understanding the decision-making process itself. What threshold had been crossed? What changed? Why was the public interest considered sufficient in this case? Minister Wong's answer remained consistent. She argued that the government considered the matter carefully, weighed competing interests, and ultimately concluded that disclosure was appropriate under the circumstances. She also emphasised that the government's commitment to protecting genuinely sensitive information remains unchanged, yet the more she repeated that explanation, the more Paterson pushed back. The exchange began taking on the rhythm of a political chess match. One side defending process, the other side challenging consistency, one side emphasizing discretion, the other demanding clarity, and as the confrontation intensified, broader political implications began emerging. Opposition figures suggested the situation raised legitimate questions about government transparency and accountability. Government supporters argued the opposition was attempting to manufacture controversy around a decision made in good faith after appropriate consultation. Neither narrative fully dominated. Instead, the debate expanded. Journalists began discussing whether modern governments face increasing pressure to disclose information more rapidly than in previous decades. National security experts debated the balance between operational secrecy and democratic accountability. Former military personnel offered differing views on whether public disclosure in such circumstances strengthens or weakens public trust. Meanwhile, ordinary Australians watched another chapter unfold in the ongoing struggle between secrecy and transparency. The international dimension added another layer of complexity. Australia's strategic environment has changed dramatically over recent years. Security partnerships, intelligence cooperation, and defence coordination have become increasingly important. Decisions regarding public disclosure can carry implications beyond Australia's borders, affecting relationships with allies and shaping perceptions among adversaries. That reality made this week's exchange even more significant. Because at its core, the debate wasn't only about what happened in this particular case. It was about future cases, future disclosures, future governments, future national security decisions. Paterson repeatedly hinted at this broader concern. If exceptions are made today, how will similar situations be handled tomorrow? What guidance exists for future ministers? What expectations should Parliament have going forward? Those questions remain largely unanswered. And that uncertainty is precisely why the debate continues. As the hearing progressed, frustration became increasingly visible on both sides. Wong argued that she had already explained the government's position repeatedly. Paterson argued that his questions had not been fully addressed. The chair occasionally intervened as the exchange grew more heated, but the underlying disagreement remained unresolved. By the end of the session, neither side had achieved a clear victory. Yet politically, the clash had already accomplished something important. It forced a national conversation, a conversation about transparency, a conversation about accountability, a conversation about how governments communicate sensitive information in an era of intense public scrutiny. And perhaps most importantly, a conversation about trust, because trust ultimately sits at the centre of every national security debate. Trust that governments will protect sensitive information when necessary. Trust that governments will be transparent when possible. Trust that exceptions are based on principle rather than convenience. Trust that institutions are operating in the public interest. When that trust is challenged, political consequences often follow. That is why this exchange resonated so strongly. It wasn't simply another Senate hearing. It wasn't merely another political disagreement. It touched on fundamental questions about how Australia governs itself in an increasingly complex world. As geopolitical tensions continue evolving and security issues remain at the forefront of public debate, these questions are unlikely to disappear. In fact, they may become even more important, because future governments will face similar dilemmas. Future ministers will confront similar decisions, future oppositions will ask similar questions, and Australians will continue demanding clear answers. For now, the debate remains unresolved. Minister Wong maintains that the government acted appropriately after careful consideration. Senator Paterson continues questioning whether the decision established a new benchmark for future disclosures. The government says the circumstances were unique. Critics argue the precedent now exists. Only time will reveal which interpretation proves more persuasive. But one thing is beyond dispute. This week's clash ensured the issue won't be forgotten anytime soon. So what do you think? Did Senator Paterson raise important questions about transparency and consistency? Did Minister Wong adequately explain the government's reasoning? Was the Prime Minister right to disclose the information after National Security Committee consideration, or should governments maintain a stricter approach to operational matters? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Australian politics, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, because as national security debates continue to intensify and political tensions keep rising, the next major parliamentary showdown could be just around the corner.